In the picturesque neighborhood of Willow Creek, where every lawn was a manicured testament to order and every house a replica of suburban perfection, lived Karen. She was the self-appointed overseer of our homeowners association, a title she wore with the kind of pride usually reserved for monarchs. Her kingdom was one of rules, regulations, and the unyielding belief in her infallibility. I moved to Willow Creek for its serene charm, a refuge from the clamor of city life. My little house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, a quiet retreat defined by a white picket fence and a sprawling maple tree that whispered secrets in the wind. For a while, it was perfect. Karen was the storm that disrupted that perfect peace, a whirlwind of vigilance and petty authority. Her first incursions were minor. A note slipped under the door reminding me to trim the hedges. A reminder left on the windshield about parking exactly 2 feet from the curb. Her handwriting was a tight scrawl, like clenched teeth on paper. I obliged, more out of a desire to keep the peace than any real concern for the guidelines she enforced with such fervor. I trimmed the hedges and adjusted my parking with the kind of quiet acquiescence that comes from years of city living diplomacy. In a community where everyone knew your business, the path of least resistance seemed the wisest route. But Karen's appetite for control was insatiable. Her gaze, always watchful, saw infractions where none existed. One morning, a squirrel had the audacity to scatter acorns from my tree onto the sidewalk. By afternoon, a letter had arrived, meticulously folded and sealed, informing me of my responsibility for the mess. I read it under the dappled light of the maple, a bemused smile dancing on my lips. A part of me admired her dedication. Another part marveled at the absurdity. I swept the acorns, wondering if it was the tree's fault or the squirrel's. Perhaps, in another life, Karen had been an arbiter of cosmic justice, now relegated to our little slice of suburbia. Still, I maintained my composure. My response was to let the wind carry the leaves as it wished, a silent protest against the futility of such constraints. In the quiet of my own space, I found solace, the kind that Karen's letters could not breach. Yet even the most patient of waters will ripple when disturbed. Karen's actions escalated, her need for control becoming a feverish pursuit. She planted small flags on my lawn, marking imaginary borders that neither I nor my grass had crossed. Each flag a testament to her resolve, each boundary a line in the sand drawn with invisible ink. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of defiance. The world moved on, oblivious to the trivial battles of the well-to-do suburbia. Karen expected compliance, but she didn't anticipate resilience. Quiet strength often goes unnoticed until it stands unyielding in the face of unreasonable demands. There was a certain power in inaction, a subtle defiance in refusing to be provoked. And so, life continued in our little corner of Willow Creek. The tension, a low hum beneath the surface, the calm before the storm. Karen's latest endeavor was soon to come. An act so audacious it would turn the tide of our quiet war. She was the architect of her own downfall, laying the groundwork with each petty decree. But for now, the air held its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash of wills. The maple whispered its secrets to the night, and I listened, knowing that patience, like the tree, would weather the storm. Karen was not one to retreat gracefully. As the first light of dawn crept over our small neighborhood, she prepared her next assault with the precision of a general planning a siege. Her weapons were not swords or guns, but a bundle of papers and a clipboard filled with all the power her position could muster. The HOA rulebook, normally a dusty tome of little interest, became her compendium of vendettas. In the quiet hours where morning dew still clung to the grass, she slipped citations under doors like malignant Christmas cards, each one dripping with absurdities only she could conjure. My mailbox was graced with a notice claiming the color of my front door was aggressively non-compliant. It was a mild shade of blue. Ironically, Karen's own door was the color of a neon circus tent, somehow escaping her wrath. Hypocrisy was her art form. The neighborhood grapevine, tended mostly by Karen's own whispers, began to yield a crop of rumors. According to her latest tale, I was planning to replace the grass on my lawn with gravel, a desertification of suburbia, she called it. In truth, I'd merely considered a drought-resistant garden, but in Karen's narrative, I was a defiler of green spaces, a rogue agent in an environmental war. Walking down the street felt different now. Eyes lingered a second too long. Neighbors offered tight smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Karen's shadow loomed large. I found myself wondering how it got to this point. A simple parking dispute had mutated into a battle for the soul of the subdivision. Her spike strips had been a declaration of war. Now, she was assembling an arsenal of legislation and gossip. The air was thick with tension. An invisible seam had been ripped open, separating those she had swayed from those who remained silently indifferent. Those who knew me offered quiet nods of solidarity, small gestures in the face of her tyranny. Our neighborhood had become the stage for a suburban opera, each of us playing our parts in a drama written by Karen's overzealous hand. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of defiance, a police car rolled down the street, its presence as deliberate as Karen's machinations. Its destination was clear. It parked in front of Karen's house, the engine idling like a beast waiting to pounce. The officers, stern and methodical, approached her door. A few neighbors gathered, curiosity outweighing any pretense of discretion. Karen's voice, usually a sharp staccato, was now a muffled opera. The officers' words were lost to the wind, but their intent was unmistakable. The scene unfolded slowly, each second stretching into the next, the air crackling with the weight of consequence. There was no dramatic wailing, no outburst of emotion, just the slow, inevitable march of justice. Karen emerged, escorted by the officers, her earlier bravado a distant memory. For the first time, her clipboard seemed to burden her, a symbol of her overreach. She left the way she had arrived, carried not by triumph, but by the quiet, inexorable force of accountability. A whisper of relief swept through the neighborhood. The first act of her reign had ended, and with it, the fear she had cultivated. In the quiet aftermath, life resumed its rhythm, the neighborhood slowly knitting itself back together. My driveway, liberated from her spiteful machinations, stood as a testament to resilience. The battle was not over, but the tide had begun to turn. The morning sun crept through the blinds, painting stripes of light across my kitchen floor. I sipped my coffee and watched the neighbor's cat prowl along the fence, oblivious to the human dramas unfolding below. My driveway, still scarred by the jagged remnants of Karen's spike strips, lay like a battlefield at rest. Each twisted metal shard was a silent testament to the chaos of the previous day. I had spent the night cataloging every detail, every slight, every violation of our quiet life. I'd become a meticulous archivist of petty grievances, a historian of our suburban skirmishes. Karen's obsessive need for control had manifested in escalating absurdities. From HOA letters detailing imaginary infractions to her pièce de résistance, the spike strips, her escalating antics were a performance, a desperate ballet of control where she alone wrote the score. But the thing about stories is, they can be rewritten, and I've always been comfortable with a pen in my hand. The evidence lay before me, a patchwork quilt of photographs, emails, and recordings, each piece a tile in the mosaic of Karen's unraveling. I had captured it all: the clandestine meetings with the HOA board, the whispered conspiracies, the shadowy dealings conducted under the guise of neighborhood improvement. If Karen wanted a war, she'd chosen her opponent poorly. I gathered my arsenal, a manila envelope nearly bursting at the seams. It was time to reveal the narrative she'd woven so tightly around our lives, time to pull the thread. Later, I found myself standing on my front porch, the envelope clutched like a talisman against the morning chill. Karen's house stared back at me, its facade pristine and orderly, a fortress of artifice. I could see her silhouette through the window, pacing like a caged tiger. As if sensing the shifting tides, she emerged, heels clicking defiantly on the pavement. Her eyes met mine, a flicker of something feral beneath the veneer of suburban perfection. Karen was a woman who thrived on the fear she sowed, but today the soil had changed. I offered her the envelope with a steady hand, her brow furrowed, a crack in her porcelain mask. She hesitated, then snatched it with a practiced air of superiority, a brief, silent comedy of manners. The moment stretched, tense and fragile, as she flipped through the contents. Her expression hardened. The fortress walls showed signs of crumble. I watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction, her world shifting, the narrative slipping through her fingers like sand. Then, a siren's wail in the distance. The irony was almost poetic. Karen's confidence faltered, the first note of panic creeping into her eyes. She hadn't anticipated this turn of the script, the arrival of law enforcement, a deus ex machina in our little drama. They approached with the methodical calm of those who had seen everything. Karen, caught in the harsh spotlight of reality, sputtered her protests, her voice a brittle echo of authority, but the officers were unmoved, dispassionate observers to our play's climax. As they placed her in handcuffs, the irony was bitter on my tongue. Karen, once the queen of our HOA court, reduced to this final, undignified exit. Her fall from grace was a lesson in hubris, a reminder that the stories we tell have a way of writing themselves when we least expect it. I watched her go not with triumph, but with a quiet, reflective understanding. The sun climbed higher, bathing the street in a golden glow, washing clean the battleground of our suburban saga. My driveway, now free of its cruel adornments, seemed almost peaceful. The story had found its natural conclusion, a fitting end to a tale of power and retribution. Life, like the sun, pressed onward, indifferent to the small dramas played out in its presence. And I, a mere scribe, turned the page and stepped back into the gentle rhythm of my life. As the morning sun cast long shadows across the neighborhood, I stood at my window and watched as the events of last night lay exposed like wounds in the soft light. The spike strips, jagged and menacing, were still sprawled across my driveway, waiting to puncture the tires of any unsuspecting visitor. They seemed a fitting metaphor for Karen's twisted sense of control, as sharp and misplaced as the apparatus itself. The neighborhood had started to wake, and with it, a ripple of curiosity moved like a wave across the manicured lawns. The word was out. It started with hushed whispers at the end of driveways as neighbors collected their morning papers or walked their dogs. Each nod or sideways glance was a silent confirmation of the tales that had been shared over backyard fences and in book clubs. Karen was at it again, and this time she had gone too far. There was a peculiar tension in the air, like the first few moments before a summer storm. I could feel it in the way the birds hesitated in their morning chorus, and in the way people paused, just for a second, before walking past my house. It was as if everyone was waiting for something, an unspoken promise of retribution or resolution. As I stepped outside, the cool air wrapped around me, bracing yet oddly comforting. The spike strips lay in front of me, a physical manifestation of Karen's vendetta. Last night, they had been an obstacle. This morning, they were evidence, and evidence had power. I had already taken pictures, immortalizing her folly for the authorities. Neighbors began to gather, a slow but steady procession of concerned faces. Curiosity had pulled them as if by magnetic force, and they lingered at the edges of my property, their eyes darting between the strips and me, questions hanging in the air, unspoken yet understood. Their presence was a balm, an unvoiced support that fortified my resolve. Among them, Karen appeared, her walk confident yet lined with the trepidation of a lioness facing a pride turning against her. Her smile was a thin veneer, cracking at the edges under the weight of the reality she had created. She stood opposite me, a battlefield of grass and concrete between us. The spike strips lying like a border, a demarcation of her overstepped bounds. In that moment, an officer arrived, his presence cutting through the gathering like a knife through softened butter. His uniform was a symbol of authority, the embodiment of the justice I had quietly sought. He walked with purpose, each step echoing a promise of accountability. Karen's smile faltered. It was as if she were teetering on the precipice of understanding the gravity of her actions. When the officer approached Karen, her face shifted, a palette of emotions ranging from indignation to disbelief. It was a symphony of denial, the final act of a play she had directed for too long. Her protests were muted, swallowed by the reality of the situation. And when the cuffs clicked around her wrists, the sound was deafening in its finality. The neighbors watched, their silence a testament to the unfolding justice, a quiet acknowledgement that the reign of the HOA Karen was perhaps drawing to a close. As she was led away, I caught a final glimpse of her face. It was a portrait of disbelief, a woman who had never expected to taste the bitter flavor of consequences. As the crowd dispersed, a sense of calm enveloped me. It was not victory I felt, but relief. The storm had passed, leaving in its wake a community, perhaps a little stronger, a little wiser. I turned back to my house. The spike strips, now mere remnants of a battle, concluded. The sun continued its ascent, warming the ground beneath my feet, marking the dawn of a new chapter. As the early morning light crept through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor, I sat with a cup of coffee in hand, cradling its warmth. The steam curled lazily upward, a ghostly dance above the dark liquid. Outside, the world seemed calm, quiet, deceptively so. But I knew better. I had learned to see the chaos lurking beneath the veneer of suburban tranquility. My gaze drifted to the driveway, now free of its malicious spines. Just yesterday, it had been a battleground, a silent witness to Karen's fanaticism. I had been meticulous, documenting each transgression with the precision of a watchmaker. Photos, timestamps, a log that read like a diary of absurdity. Who needs fiction when life offers such stories? A soft chime pulled me from my reverie, an email notification. The attorney's response was concise, a few lines that carried the weight of retribution. The law, it seemed, had no patience for Karen's antics. Trespassing, property damage, words that spelled justice in dry legalese. I had been patient, allowing the system to work its slow magic. In this waiting, there was power. The morning passed in a haze of routine, the normalcy, a comforting cloak, yet beneath, tension simmered, a low hum beneath the everyday noise. The neighborhood was a stage, each house a silent witness, waiting. Afternoon sun slanted across the pavement as I heard it, the distinctive hum of Karen's SUV approaching. Like a predator stalking familiar prey, I watched from the window, invisible, as she parked with self-assured arrogance. The world was her domain, or so she believed. Then came the moment, the knocking at her door, a trio of sharp raps that echoed with finality. The officers were composed, professional, their demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos they were about to unravel. Through the window, I saw her open the door, her face a tapestry of surprise and outrage. I stepped outside, a silent observer in this unfolding drama. Her voice carried across the lawn, a screech of disbelief that seemed to splinter the air. And yet, the officers remained unmoved, their resolve an unyielding wall against her fury. In that moment, I felt an unexpected pang of empathy, a strange, unwelcome emotion, but it passed like a shadow, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. Sometimes justice wasn't loud or showy. Sometimes it was quiet, ironic, like the sound of handcuffs clicking into place, a metallic punctuation to her ranting symphony. As they led her away, I turned back to my house, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the lawn. The neighborhood seemed to exhale, a collective breath finally released. It was over, or at least, this chapter was. I poured another cup of coffee, the ritual a balm against the tumultuous day. The rich aroma filled the air, grounding me in this moment. Outside, the evening settled in, a comforting blanket over the day's events. Karen had underestimated the quiet power of patience, the slow burn of justice. In a way, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But as I took a sip, savoring the warmth, I knew this was the calm I had yearned for. Peace, tempered by the lessons of chaos. And perhaps, just perhaps, a quieter neighborhood to wake up to tomorrow. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns, painting a scene of deceptive tranquility. I stood on my porch, watching as the world unfurled around me. The air was still, a gentle pause before the flurry of what would inevitably follow. Karen didn't return to her house that afternoon. Her absence was a stark contrast to her usual omnipresence, always lurking at the edges of our lives, monitoring with the precision of a hawk. But today, there was only an empty driveway and the faint echo of her misdeeds. The community had gathered on the street, a quiet hum of anticipation buzzing through the crowd. They were drawn together not by the usual social pleasantries but by a shared, unspoken relief. It was as if the neighborhood had collectively exhaled, releasing the tension that had been twisting its spine for too long. I watched them, familiar faces in a setting that felt newly unfamiliar. Without Karen's perpetual interference, the air seemed lighter, less oppressive. Her influence had been like a late summer storm, unpredictable and disruptive. But now the clouds were parting. From my vantage point, I could see the police car parked inconspicuously near the end of the street, an ironic fortress, waiting to collect its unknowing captive. The officer inside was patient, his silhouette a reminder of the inevitability that awaited Karen. In a way, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Her life had become a tragic opera where she was both the performer and the unwitting audience. She had wielded the HOA rulebook like a weapon, her own version of a tyrant's scepter. But like all tyrants, her reign was destined to crumble. The sun dipped lower, painting the world in hues of orange and gold, a reminder that even the longest days must end. I reflected on this as I walked down my driveway, now clear of its treacherous spikes. The asphalt felt solid beneath my feet, a simple reassurance that balance was returning. As if on cue, Karen's car rounded the corner. Her arrival was unceremonious, almost quiet. She parked, oblivious to the waiting officer. Her movements were hurried, impatient, as though eager to resume her reign, but the universe had other plans. The officer stepped out, a gentle force in a realm that had known too much turmoil. Their brief exchange was muffled by distance, but Karen's reaction was unmistakable. The moment stretched, a tapestry of disbelief, anger, and finally, resignation. It was a silent symphony, the crescendo of her misguided symphony. Time seemed to slow as she was led away. Handcuffs a stark, metallic contrast against the fading daylight. It was a scene that demanded reflection, a reminder of how power could corrupt and how justice, in its unyielding patience, always found a way. As the police car drove away, the street settled into a tentative calm. The neighbors dispersed, their movements infused with quiet relief. The balance was being restored, the community reclaiming its narrative. I returned to my porch, the air cool against my skin. The sky was a watercolor canvas, promising a new dawn. And as I stood there, I realized that Karen's story was not just hers alone. It was a cautionary tale, a reflection on power, control, and the inevitable downfall of hubris. The evening deepened, stars appearing one by one, like distant witnesses to the day's events, and in that serene silence, I found peace, a peace that had been absent for far too long, now slowly returning to its rightful place in the heart of our community.